back to Troubleshooting Agile. Hi there, Jeffrey.
Hi, Squirrel. So, Squirrel, you and I really like productive arguments, and there's a
Boy,
bunch of
do
different
we.
kind of arguments, especially with each other, but also with other people. But there's different kinds of arguments, and there's something particular that you brought up that I thought was worth talking about, which is arguing about facts.
Oh, yeah,
What
one of
can
my
you talk
favorites.
about that?
Yeah, well, let me tell you a personal story first. So, in university, I had a very good friend, and I noticed when she moved into a house we were renting with a bunch of friends all together at university, that she brought like three dictionaries and two encyclopedias and like an almanac. And I said, wow, that's an awful lot of information to bring along. And she said, well, haven't you ever noticed what happens when there's an argument? And I said, well, no, actually, I haven't. And she said, well, in my family, we would have hour-long battles over the dinner table about which baseball player had won the World Series in whatever year, or what the population of Zanzibar was, or something like that. And I got so annoyed by these arguments because they were pointless, and you could just look up the answer. Of course, all of this is pre-internet, right? So, the modem was ba-dum bum. It was not, you
Yeah.
could just look it up on your phone. And so she carried around all these things, and she literally would do it in our house we lived in together. If we had a discussion about a fact, you knew she was going to jump up, run into the other room, grab the almanac, and say, "Yes, it rained on this day last year," or something, whatever it was that was a fact. And I just thought that
Yeah.
was such a sort of notable example of a way to have an unproductive argument. What do you think?
Yep. Well, which part's unproductive? The having the almanac to end it, or going on about people's recollections of what what the facts were?
Well, yeah, having the argument that is easily settled about a fact, which you can look up in an almanac. So I thought her solution was at least interesting. I'd rather that she'd have a sort of a double loop learning discussion in which she could say, "Hey, stop arguing about facts." That obviously hadn't worked in her family, but might work with us. But as a sort of first order solution, sorry, looking something up seemed like a good way to get to a really useful point of discussion and a way to move forward.
Yeah, and I think it's great. And actually, the person I know who does this a lot is actually my older son, who, if a question of fact comes up, he just pulls out his phone and Googles it. Not, being in the modern day and not even to carry the almanac with him,
Of
he's
course.
got it right there. And but for him, it's a matter of policy that if there's a question of fact, we just settle it right now. He's violently opposed. We're not going to be having a long argument about using our faulty memory of what various people think the answer was from something that happened 5 years ago or something.
And the particular reason I bring this up, and the reason we were talking about it, Jeffrey, is that I've got clients who wind up in this situation. And I'm thinking of one who I worked with a while ago, and their situation was very similar to my friend's family, that very frequently at executive level, they would be having some kind of debate about whether a project was on time or not, or whether sales were behind prediction, or whether a certain technical solution was successful in the market. And these are all facts.
Right.
You could look them up. Now, the difference in business, and the thing that our listeners might have encountered, is that there isn't an almanac typically for your business. There isn't an encyclopedia where you can look up certain pieces of information. That's why organizations sometimes try to create those sort of single pane of glass or single source of truth or something like that, where everybody can look. Those projects
Yeah.
are really valuable and good to try to do. They're often not successful because it's actually very difficult to determine whether you're on track for sales. That is a fact. That it does, if the fate of the earth depended on it, knowing exactly how much you were ahead or behind on your sales targets is possible. But in many organizations with operations on many continents and with very complicated sales structures and contracts that have 473 pages, it actually can be difficult to tell. However, it's valuable to work on it. It's valuable to
Yes.
try to get to some facts, because the debate about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, or whether our balance sheet is more biased toward OPEX or CAPEX. Those are things that you should not be debating because if you are avoiding the actual dispute, which is, hey, you're not doing enough in sales, or hey, there's a real problem in our product line, namely that nobody wants to buy it anymore. Those are the productive conflicts, and I'd much rather get my clients onto that discussion. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's great, and I definitely have experienced the kind of pains you're talking about. And if I just want to focus on this example of like sales, are we on track for sales? One thing I've encountered at companies is the gap between what people put out as their metric, their measure, which is something like, oh, we have this annual target, or we have this quarterly target, or both. But then there's other information that's like part of their prediction that they don't capture. And what I mean here, the example might be like, well, Q3 in our European operations are always slow. Everyone is on holiday in August, so we don't really expect in Q3 to sign contracts until September. It might be some sort of tacit knowledge that people have, or we have a renewals-based business, and our renewals mostly happen in Q4, so we don't expect our revenue to be linear over the course of the year. So there might be things like this. So the question then, when you come down to this question of are we on track, this is where I find that people end up debating because they kind of had different mental models about what they should be expecting right now. The person who has kind of a linear expectation versus the person who is expecting like something to come in all at the very end. And they may have different ideas. And also they might be looking at, say, different ideas of what they're measuring as important. Maybe they're looking at stuff earlier in the funnel. They're saying like, well, how many things do we have in contract? How many things are we, awaiting signature? How many things are under negotiation? So different shape of the funnel.
And there's a slippery slope there, because something that often happens is somebody will say, yeah, this sale is almost closed. Yeah, they've verbally agreed. Yes,
Yes.
we have an email with a memorandum of understanding. There can be all kinds of layers and shades of meaning. And unless you pick something that is an absolutely incontrovertible fact, like we have money in the bank, then you are in the world of shades of gray, which is a useful one. Often it is much more useful to understand the contracts that are almost signed than it is to understand how much money you've actually collected, because the collection may take months, and that could be put you way behind the curve of what's actually happening in your sales organization.
Yeah, that's right. So there's all these kind of details. Now, the thing that occurred to me about this is that it is possible, and I think a good idea for people to encode up front what their models are of how they're going to keep score. What are the factors they're going to look at? What are their predictions in finer detail? And it's also very useful to keep track of people's accuracy over time. So if they say, for example, well, I think that there's an 80% chance these people are going to close, or like 95%, this is definitely going to close. It'd be really
That's
nice
every
to
salesperson
have.
everywhere, ever, has a 95% confidence level. Keep going. Yeah.
That's right. But the thing is, we can track these things, if we care to, and to say, what's the calibration for this? When people say 95%, does it really happen 19 times out of 20? Is that really what happens? Because one thing it says is 95% doesn't mean every time, but it does mean 19 times out of 20. But the thing that I find is that people put very little effort into either articulating the model, like, well, how are we going to agree what success means? How are we going to judge it at different points in time? They don't make those predictions very legible. And the way to look at it in sort of in prediction market terms, they don't agree on the resolution criteria. And then the second thing is they don't really keep track of how well have our predictions played out over time. And I think these are two areas where there could be a lot more value because it will take people, it will make the models explicit. And I think that's the key thing here is that do we have shared models that we're talking from, or do we each have our own mental model that we never actually share, and then we can talk at the top of the ladder with kind of abstractions about, are we on track or not?
And something that our listeners might resonate with, might remind them, might seem familiar to them, is the idea that actually we're never going to agree on what the truth is. The truth is really kind of fractal, because once you get into the very tiny details of has somebody signed this, and did we have the legal authority to sign it, and so on, or if we switch over to software and we say, well, is this software delivered? Well, it's available. It's been purchased by some users, but none of them are actually using it yet. Does that mean that it's live? Well, you could have a long debate about that. What I tend to do, and what I did with the client I was referring to before, is to agree on a single source of lies. And what I mean by that is that if everybody agrees that we're going to be this far off, and we know that it's not exactly the right number, but it's the way we keep score, then we can do an awful lot with trends. Hey, we know that our sales are slow in Q3, and we know that we agreed explicitly that we aren't going to correct for that. So we know that sales are down because it's August. But sales are down 80%. I think that's a little slower than our normal August. We have some trouble here. Or similarly for software, we know it always takes longer to get an iOS application approved and out on an iPhone. But you know what? We haven't had one come out for 3 months. Something seems to be going wrong here. And we know that there's a bias in our numbers, but this is a lot bigger, or this is a trend, or this is something that isn't working. So
Yeah.
what I usually tell my clients, and what I usually set up for them when I help them with this kind of operating system for their business, is just agree on what you're going to track and what the trends are, and don't try to get to absolute truth, because that's a fool's game. It's going to take you so long to get to an actual truth that everyone can actually take to the bank, literally, that you're never going to actually be able to use it.
Yeah, I really like that. And what it comes immediately to mind, and this tells you a little bit about my daily routine, is I have one of these electronic scales that does capacitive measurement to try to give me an estimate of body fat percentage. But I know it's wrong. These things are known to be unreliable. However, I use it exactly the way you describe, which is not as a fact that it's giving me, but rather a trend. How is that number changing over time? And then occasionally, when I really want to know, then I can go and pay for a DEXA scan and go and get an actual measurement, which is a little bit like, yeah, at some point the books close and you can say, here's the official numbers. But the thing is, I can go and check my local scale every single day. That's cheap to get that kind of trend data, whereas getting the actual numbers from a measurement is relatively expensive. So use the cheap option frequently to track the trends and to have and decide if somebody needs to change or not. While then occasionally we do have the more expensive process to give us the actual numbers. Am I getting the right analogy there?
It certainly sounds right to me. And to do a little translation for our listeners who are more in the software development world than either the sales or the body fat world, then they might be interested to think about predictions of when software will be live, what a particular vendor's price will be, whether we're on budget or under budget or over budget for contractors, lots of different inputs and things that we do with our technology teams have exactly the same characteristics, that they're hard to predict. The truth is actually kind of fractal, and the truth doesn't matter. It's most important to get to something that will help us to measure a trend. And predicting software delivery is one of the notoriously most difficult to predict areas. It's not something that we expect to be able to nail down with absolute certainty, nor do we need to. So stop trying to predict exactly when your software will be ready. Instead, get frequent feedback, just like Jeffrey on his scale. Figure out whether your team is on track or not. Cut scope, improve the accuracy of your predictions in various other ways. But don't try to nail down exactly when something will be done or exactly what features will be in it. That's not going to work because the world is too fractal and facts are too slippery.
I like it. So, arguing about facts, it sounds like we kind of agree the answer is don't. Instead, agree on what
Yes,
models you're going to use in place of that.
exactly. So, if our listeners are arguing about facts, or if they want to argue about our facts and tell us that we're wrong about some of the facts we've used in this podcast, we'd love to hear from them. And the best way to do that, of course, is on agileconversations.com, where you will find our book, Agile Conversations. You'll find free material, free downloads, free videos, material on holding a conversational dojo, all kinds of fun things. Which is all available for you on agileconversations.com, as well as our email and Twitter and lots of other ways to get in touch with us and argue with us, whether it's about facts or not. We welcome all such arguments. Of course, the other way to keep in touch with us is to come along next week when we'll have another edition of Troubleshooting Agile. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Squirrel.